Good morning. I'm Rick Davis. It's my good fortune to serve as a minister of this congregation where Carol Manka was a beloved member of the congregation. First thing I'd like is to thank you for the gift of your presence this morning. It's really a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful day outside, and yet you've chosen to come here and be here. And I know that the spirit of love and compassion and friendship is what led you here today, and so I feel really grateful and uplifted to see you. May this spirit lead us every day as we strive to be present for one another. It is with sorrow that I stand before you to acknowledge that our dear friend Carol Jean Manka has died. It's been a while now, and I still grieve this loss, as do you. Centuries ago, Rabbi Judah Halevi spoke for all of us when he crafted this one phrase. There's a poem that goes with it, but this one phrase, "'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch." He speaks for all of us because it is a fearful thing to love what death can touch, because we know that the losses that death brings will someday plunge us all into grief at one point or another. Like today or tomorrow, grief makes unpredictable visits, but it will come if you allow it. If you do not allow yourself to feel your grief from this loss or other losses, then the grief will stay inside and weigh you down. The way through grief is through it, not around it. So it's good to grieve, to cry. It's better if you can cry in the presence of another person. No need to keep a stiff upper lip or stifle your sobs whenever grief does come to you in your life. This is a time for tears if tears need to be shed. But our hearts especially go out to you, Paul, for you feel this loss most keenly. Your grief is the most acute and ongoing. But here's something about the tears that we shed at a moment like this. Yeah, there are tears of grief, but I think a lot of the tears that we may think are tears of grief are actually tears of gratitude. Gratitude. Whenever we are overwhelmed by any one of the countless gifts in life, the heart floods with gratitude and it floods over into tears. All of which is to say that our primary purpose today is to say thanks. Thanks to our good dear friend for the love she shared with us, to remember and celebrate her amazing journey amongst us. And may this also be a time when each of us can reflect on the deeper meanings and purposes of our own lives. It's a time to look at the reality of the transition we call death with openness and honesty. All the wisdom traditions invite us to look beneath mere surface appearances and peer into the sacred mystery, to become aware of deeper, constant truths and the ever-flowing stream of life. Indeed, all the wisdom traditions of humankind affirm that there is something greater and more wondrous than meets the eye or can be readily grasped by the mind, something within us all that transcends the seeming finality of death. The Unitarian minister A. Powell Davies offered up the same wisdom more succinctly in a reading I would like to share with you. When sorrow comes, let us accept it simply as a part of life. Let the heart be open to pain. Let it be stretched by it. All the evidence we have says this is the better way. An open heart never grows bitter, or if it does, it cannot remain so. In the desolate hour, there is an outcry, a clenching of the hands upon emptiness, a burning pain of bereavement, a weary ache of loss. But anguish, like ecstasy, is not forever. There comes in time a gentleness, a returning quietness, a restoring stillness. And this too is a door to life. Here also is a deepening of meaning. It can lead to dedication, a going forward to the triumph of the soul, the conquering of the wilderness. And in the process will come a deepening inward knowledge. Then in the final reckoning, all is well. Let's hear some marimba music. Carol played the marimba, and it'll just give us a time to be together and feel our love. Such gentle, musical, beautiful music. It does remind me of Carol. Not long after Carol was born in Santa Monica, California, her older sister, Joan, 3 or 4 years older, 5 years older maybe, I'm not sure, she contracted rheumatic fever. It wasn't contagious, but it meant that she required extra care at home. And fortunately, their mother had been trained as a nurse at Dornbecker Hospital in Portland, so she knew how to take care of her older daughter, who was confined to a bed that she was sharing with her younger sister, Carol. Now imagine being bedridden at such a young age. This was surely hard for Joan. I think she was 5 or 6 years old at the time. But her spirits were lifted one day when she saw that her younger sister was rocking her own crib in such a way as to move it closer and closer and closer to her bed. And Carol was rocking her crib intentionally because she wanted to get very close to her older sister so she could say hello and let her know that she was there for comfort and support. When Paul told me this story, it was congruent with my own experience of Carol many, many years later when she served on our committee on the ministry. She had her own gentle but determined way of kind of rocking over, see how I was doing. That's how she was. Her life was in many ways a variation of this compassionate impulse to rock over to where she could let others know that she was there to be of support. Soon enough, life took Carol far beyond the cradle, out into the wider world. And her world was wider than most American youth because just as she was entering grade school, her father's employment as a communications executive took the family over to the Philippines. And that's where Carol spent much of her youth. Getting to travel and live in another country and learn its culture greatly expanded her horizons and deepened her perspective. In addition to living in the Philippines, she and her family, they traveled extensively in Asia and Europe and South America. They visited over 30 countries, some of them many times. We can never say for certain whether it's nature or nurture that mostly shapes our character and personality, but having such a broad exposure to various cultures and societies surely strengthened Carol's strong sense of self. Although she was kind and gentle by nature, she wasn't somebody who could be told what to think or what to feel. Growing up was an age when females were often constrained by tradition, but Carol negotiated life on her own terms, determined her own path. That is, she knew and trusted herself. Indeed, she was an astute judge of character and made good choices at important junctures in her life. Her path led her towards teaching, especially effective written communication. And after earning her bachelor's degree in English literature in the United States, she returned to the Philippines to teach in the American School in Manila. And among other duties, she was the faculty advisor for the biweekly student newspaper. It was called the Bamboo Telegraph. The Bamboo Telegraph. And somehow that Asian Western fusion kind of reminds me of Carol, someone who had depth and a perspective that comes from being exposed to a wide variety of countries and cultures and people. But America was Carol's native land, and after teaching in the Philippines, she came back to the United States to attend graduate school at Michigan State University, where she worked on a degree, and she was working towards her PhD in literature, completed it almost, but she loved literature. That was her main thing. She wanted to study literature, but she also liked to write. She liked to create her own stories. Given her extensive experience and her natural gifts for teaching and mentoring students in the Philippines, She was the ideal person to be the receptionist at the grad dorm at Michigan State because she knew all about the challenges and the struggles of the students. And best of all, she was a good listener. She was a good listener. Mother Naylor, they called her, the grad students called her, because she could listen. She could listen and be present with people. In spite of her vast experience in the world, there was one area where Carol was inexperienced. Having grown up with one sister and no brothers, she hadn't had a lot of extensive contact with boys or with men. And the same could be said of the man she met at the university. Paul grew up in a house full of boys. He was the second oldest of four brothers, and his two younger brothers were quite a bit younger, and Paul had to look after them when he was growing up. But he was relatively clueless in regards to understanding women. So they kind of met on equal footing in a sense. They met over breakfast. They first met over breakfast that lasted till noon. At first, Carol was taken aback. Paul is an intense guy. He was away from Buffalo, New York for the first time. He was a bit homesick. She initially reacted to his rough exterior, the blue-collar working class side. But then, being a good judge of character, she saw beyond the exterior and recognized that here was a good and kind person, and with good brain power, too. She was just the one to help Paul slow down by actually listening to him and helping him polish up his writing and his language skills. She could see that he had intelligence and good ideas, but this didn't always come through as well as he hoped. Listening to him could be like drinking from a fire hose. So much came out so fast, and Carol helped him harness this energy and refine his language and enhance his skill at written and spoken communication. Avoid using the passive voice, she advised him. The active voice is less wordy, gets people's attention. And Paul trusted this feedback, saw that she was right. He was grateful for the feedback. It made a big difference as he kept improving his communication skills. So now he had found a partner and a friend who took interest in him, who saw a way that she could offer him something that would enrich his life and advance his career at the same time. Paul and Carol were not at all alike, and yet together there was a synergy, a yin-yang balance that made them a complete whole. They began their relationship as friends, and then they could see that they were suited for one another, and they tied the knot in 1969 at the Unitarian Church in Buffalo, New York. I'd just gotten out of high school, otherwise I would have offered to officiate, Paul, but I was kind of young. And upon that strong foundation of friendship and mutual respect, they created a strong marriage bond that would stand the test of time, more than half a century, 52 years. Now, Carol played the marimba, and Paul played the trombone. And although they never played these two instruments together, they did make music as a couple. Carol's gentle, beautiful, marimba-like personality played off well against Paul's trombone-like voice and vibrant mode of expression. It just worked. It just worked. And as they began to form personal and business relationships, Paul came to rely upon Carol's sound judge of people's character. They became friends. They remained friends. And they always sought to expand their own circle of friends, thanks in large measure to Carol's natural sagacity, her wisdom, her ability to look at people and read them really well. They both found meaningful work in the civil service, working for the Census Bureau, which is charged, as we know, with accurately recording the population of the United States, as is required by the Constitution. An accurate census is essential for a democracy, and Carol's intelligence and language skills were put to good use in writing and editing training manuals. She was well suited for this professional life, and she had a successful career, albeit not without some physical challenges along the way. A toe became infected, but she was a stoic type, and she didn't complain. The infection got worse, and she was in the hospital for 2 weeks before returning to work in a wheelchair. And when she returned to work in that wheelchair for an entire year, it didn't escape the notice of her fellow employees that Carol was always being wheeled in and taken such good care of by Paul, day after day. Actions speak louder than words. They had heard Paul's words before, now they saw his actions. And this daily act of devotion showed the fellow employees there that Paul was a loving and a conscientious husband, a dependable and a conscientious person. So he had proven to be this, and this helped improve his standing and reputation in the workplace, as well it should have. And it was good for Carol to receive Paul's help, especially since she tended to be stoic and didn't complain about her aches and pains. In fact, it was her reticence to complain about the injured toe that allowed it to become more infected. And this lesson wasn't lost on Carol, who realized sometimes we all need to ask for help. Thank goodness help in the form of Paul was always there. Carol was indeed a good judge of character, and she married somebody who would stay by her side through good times and hard times. Carol's creative imagination enabled her to make sense out of life's ups and downs. One side of Carol that others besides Paul might have known about was her literary creativity. She wasn't only in love with literature, she was also full of her own creative ideas for stories. She often wrote in the late evening hours, away from the prying eyes of others, because she wasn't writing to be published or widely read. She was writing as a personal form of self-expression. I read one of her stories, and I realized what she was doing with this literature. It was very interesting. She was using the stories as a way of remembering that adversity and a sense of incompleteness can be opportunities to discover new strength and new completeness and fulfillment in relationship with others. In this story, she created a positive, hopeful narrative that ends on a note of gratitude for the two main characters who find fulfillment in one another, not unlike the fulfillment that Carol and Paul found in their relationship. Stories. As a minister, I'm always aware of stories and their powerful impact on us, how the stories we create and live by shape our lives for good or ill. And the stories that Carol created in the narrative that she lived by, they were ones that benefited us all. Speaking of adversity, Carol and Paul faced some real adversity on April the 2nd, 2002, when a tornado with F4 winds, that means the winds are over 200 miles an hour, it was tearing through Maryland, and they were issuing warnings on the television, but the Mankas weren't watching television, and fortunately, Carol heard about it on the radio. But there she was, stuck in bed, a hospital bed, with an infected foot, and she couldn't move. And she urged Paul, quickly, go down to the basement for safety. But Paul wasn't going to do that. He wasn't going to leave Carol. And the devastating tornado swept really close It took away their garage, blew out the windows in the bedroom with such force that the shards of glass flew like knives into the drywall. Trees were mowed down. And yet, oddly enough, there was a pile of mulch that needed to be spread, and the tornado completely ignored that. Paul showed me the picture. There's the gone garage, but there's the pile of mulch right next to it. Who can figure? It looked like a war zone. They had to live in it for a couple of months afterwards. Then, too, there were some health concerns that convinced Carol that it was time to move on. The time was ripe to retire. The winds of change were blowing, and they realized it was time for a change for them, too. One tornado, that was enough for them. Many of their retiring co-workers were moving to Delaware, and they briefly considered this option, but then they found Delaware to be too flat and dull. They were looking for more scenic vistas. In the 80s and the 90s, Carol and Paul made a number of visits to Oregon because they were visiting her parents, Carol's parents, in Grants Pass. And she later visited a number of times to help care for them. And through this process of coming out to Oregon, coming back to the West Coast, she realized that she really did have a yearning to be out west, closer to the Pacific region, the Pacific Ocean that she had known in her youth. They did a bit of research, checked out Salem, and they discovered that Salem, at least not yet, doesn't have tornadoes. So that was a selling point for them. So the Mankas packed all their possessions and said, "Westward ho," and came out here along with their cats. The cats, yes. The story of Carol's life is incomplete without some mention of the entire family, including the other beings. Before she retired, during the year she was confined to a wheelchair, their cat Michael was closely observing the special care that Paul was giving to Carol day after day. And Carol had retired at the beginning of 2005, and Paul was going to work all the way until August. And since he would be gone during much of the day, he gave Michael special instructions to pay attention to Carol and take care of her. Now, I've never had any success getting cats to hear and heed my human commands. But somehow, this message seems to have gotten through. In fact, it got through too well, because sometimes Carol had to ask Paul to request that Michael not follow her everywhere all the time. He could give it a break, a little bit of a break. In truth, the cats were family to Carol and Paul, and the cats felt the same way. Carol and Paul was an animal lover and an active supporter of the Humane Society, and we're so happy to see representatives from the Humane Society here today. She was an active supporter of the Humane Society, a really good thing in and of itself, but it also inspired Carol and Paul to come to our congregation for the first time, whether or not you knew it or not, or planned it that way, but it worked out great. Because some years ago, before Carol and Paul had even walked through our doors or joined our congregation, we were holding our annual animal blessing service. It's always on the first Sunday in October. Have animals come in, we bless them, it's fun. It's worked out pretty well most of the time. And so the Mankas decided to attend the service and check out the congregation, and the rest is history. And every year since that time, when we're getting ready, if somebody's trying to bump the animal communion off, it's say, do we need to do that? And I say, yeah, we do. We got to do the animal communion because it's a good thing to do. And let's remember, that's what brought the Mankas in the door. And that's been wonderful for us. Both Carol and Paul became active, committed, and generous members of our community. And since her passing, many members have written or contacted Paul to let him know how she was appreciated by so many here. I certainly appreciated her. I mentioned earlier that Carol served on our committee on the ministry. That's where I really got to know her better, and she got to know me better. And I benefited from her wisdom and compassion and support as we deliberated upon many matters. I always appreciated and trusted her wise counsel. And there was never any doubt in my mind. She cares about me. She really does. She cares about me and how I'm doing. And that makes such a difference. I trusted her. She was always interested in helping and being of service, as was Paul. Still remember, I don't know how many years ago, but after a Sunday service one day, I was out there on the patio chatting with Carol and Paul, the west patio right there. And I mentioned, I love this patio. I love it, but it's a shame. It's a shame because no one with a wheelchair can get down to this patio. There's only steps down to the patio. That's too bad. People with mobility challenges are not going to be able to come to the patio. That's all I said. What a shame. Unbeknownst to me, this simple observation quickly set things in motion. Within a short period of time, the Mankas had arranged for contractors to put in a ramp to the patio. You can see it right. You can see the bars right out the window. But then they added a paved walkway around the entire building. And they had an extra ramp put in here to this exit so that if in case of a fire, people could get out quickly and easily. I wasn't expecting that. It was so neat. Every time I walk around the sidewalk, we call it the Manka meander, I think of them and how one person's vision and gift really, really makes a difference. So there's this ramp all the way around our building because Carol wanted to make sure that everyone felt included and safe. It was the same impulse that many years ago had motivated her to rock her crib over to her older bedridden sister to offer comfort and support. Carol spent some time in a wheelchair herself, and so she knew how important it was to create opportunities for everybody to feel included and supported. And thanks to Carol, many folks have been able to feel included and embraced. Even as this congregation is now fully accessible, I'm so happy that it is. You can come here with a walker or a wheelchair, and you can go anywhere, just as the rest of us can, who are not facing mobility challenges yet. We'll all face them at some point. And so it was good that we were able to do this here, but where they were living, where the Mankas were living, their own home here in Salem was not accessible everywhere, and so it made good sense for them to move to Bonaventure. And so they moved to Bonaventure. But there are some things we cannot move away from, and in Carol's case, it was a number of health problems that beset her during her final years. During her visits to the doctor, and Carol did have to see the doctor and had a lot of different medical procedures and all sorts of stuff. It was really hard for her. And yet the doctor would always note that it was her smile and her cheerful attitude that really impressed him, even when times were hard for her. And even as her health was failing, Carol's primary concern was that Paul was having to carry too heavy a burden, even though he never complained when he became her primary caregiver. Indeed, their match proved to be ideal, for each of them greatly enriched the life of the other, even as they also enriched our lives. Paul tells me that Carol liked to pick up mementos of the many places she lived and visited during her life, and she didn't like letting go of things. That is to say, she was a little bit of a pack rat. Yet we do have to let go of our things and even one another when we pass beyond this life. Let go, we must, and place our trust in the Spirit of life and love. And that Spirit now reminds us that we do not have to let go of our love, of our memories, of our dear friend. Those memories are ours to keep and cherish. And for this, we give thanks. Some of my comments come from my own personal observations. Most of them come from working with Paul, but we would love to hear any thoughts that you might choose to share with the rest of us. Your memories of Carol. Sarah's going to be walking around with the microphone, and you can just take the microphone. Just remember to point it towards your face. If you do it this way, it won't catch. So just turn it like this. But before we do pass the microphone, I want to read an email that came in from Carol's supervisor at work at the Census Bureau. And this is from Wanda Doherty, who was her boss, Carol's boss. And she writes, "When you first offered folks the chance to share their memories of Carol, I thought I would, of course, send some words. However, each time I tried, I found it difficult. First, because it acknowledged she is actually gone. But second, because words to adequately describe Carol are hard to find. Carol was passionate about words. She used them eloquently, and no words I could use could do her justice. She had a stoic and pragmatic side, but more often showed her quick-witted, easy to laugh, gentle, caring, and generous side. She was a perfectionist who seemed to recognize that perfection isn't achievable, but something to strive for. She loved to continually learn and seemed to approach hardships as challenges to overcome and to learn from. I could go on and on about the wonderful person she was. I will simply say that I have never known another person like Carol and will not likely meet another. She will be greatly missed." Thank you, Wanda, for that memory. If you have a memory that you'd like to share, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll just listen to you. That'll be great.
Good morning. I'm David Cox. I'm here with my wife, Diana. We were friends of Carol and Paul, and we were more than that. We were fellow members of NARF. NARF is an association mostly comprised of retired federal employees here in Salem. And I've often told people right from the beginning that the day Paul and Carol decided to move here to Salem was a lucky day for this city, because they've been so generous with their time and their resources and their energy, causes that we'll probably never all know about, but things that they cared about and have really made a difference in this city. For us, Carol was a secretary, which now I understand why, words. And she was good. It was one of the hardest jobs we had because every month she had to produce all those minutes. And she and Paul also helped us with our web page. They were sort of our web gurus for a while, getting what had been an inactive and incomplete page back up and running. So we really appreciated Carol. And it seemed, just as you said, no matter that she had health problems toward the end, she was always a pleasant person, always so happy, fun to be around. We're glad to have her as a member of our group. So we're just here to express our condolences to Paul, tell you, Paul, how much we're going to miss Carol, how much we appreciated her, and we're really fortunate to have known her. Thank you.
If you want to remove your mask when you're speaking, I think that's okay. It might help the rest of us hear a little better. Thanks.
I'm BJ. I'm currently the executive director at the Willamette Humane Society, and I met Carol and Paul as a volunteer manager. Okay, I'm fine. And I'll share Most of my memories are Paul and Carol, Carol and Paul. They are such a unit. But I also have a really cherished memory of a specific connection I made with Carol. But first, I want to keep breathing. First, I want to share something my wife shared with me. She worked very briefly at the Humane Society, and she got to know Carol and Paul when they were volunteering there. And she shared with me this memory that so perfectly encapsulates the gift that they were and are to us. She said, I remember when they were volunteers, they would go back into, they were volunteers in cat isolation, which makes me think of the rabbi's quote that you started with, because not all those cats survived their illness, but Carol and Paul went back there, and my wife Teresa's observation was that they saw every cat there as an individual, and they recognized the needs of each cat and did their best to provide what that cat needed, whether it was affection or conversation or some privacy or some food or water. And we've come a long way since that time, and most of our cats now make it out of that room and into loving homes. Over 95% of them now, Paul. And thanks to Paul and Carol and their support, cats thrive at the Humane Society now. They have a beautiful, quiet room for cats that come in fractious and unable to be handled. Thanks in part to Paul and Carol's generosity, that room is outfitted with quiet kennels and a quiet space far from barking dogs, and those cats get time to adjust and move into new homes, just like some cats have been able to move into the home with Paul and Carol, where they win the lottery. And I so appreciate how they understand each cat as an individual member of the family. They embody what inspires us at the Humane Society, which is to honor and respect the power of the human-animal bond. They have really demonstrated that. So thank you. And the personal memory I have of Carol really has to do with her as a writer. I had no idea until I visited them one day at Bonaventure to admire the catio that they had uniquely built on their patio so that the cats could continue an indoor-outdoor lifestyle and enjoy the fresh air and sunshine and birdsong. And Carol and I were talking, and I don't even know how it came about that I write, and she said, oh, I write too. And neither one of us writes to be published, but we write for personal reasons. And somehow I shared a piece of my writing with her, and she shared a piece of her writing with me. And that was just really touching connection. It was, I think, the first time I connected to Carol as Carol, not Carol and Paul. So I really cherish both that individual connection that I had with her, as well as that I had with them as a couple. And I will miss her greatly, because every time I saw the two of them at the shelter, it just made my heart smile. So, thank you.
I served on the Committee on Ministry at the same, where's Rick, at the same time Carol did, and I don't know if you remember specifically, Rick, because there was so much going on, but, and you've mentioned her writing, and this lovely lady here has mentioned her writing, and we had a very large, important writing assignment to do, all of us, 6 or 7 people, and it got a little tough in a committee of 7 people trying to write something specifically word for word. And it sort of fell just by, I don't know, God's grace to Carol and I doing most of the writing and collaborating by phone. And I've been in marketing writing. That was my career, public relations. And I've never met a collaborator really as wonderful and open and giving and intelligent and talented as Carol. Somebody, I think, Rick, you mentioned editing. Oh my God, it was a gift to give her something and get it edited back. And yet everything we did back and forth, I mean, I edited some of her stuff and she edited a great deal of my stuff. And what we ended up with was a product that I think we were both proud of and felt satisfied that we had done what we could to make this particular project as good as it could be. So I was hesitant to say this, but I really love Carol. I loved her through that process and through the times that I've seen her or I saw her since. She's just a wonderful person, and she made an imprint in my life that will never fade away. And I offer my condolences, Paul.
I'm Elsa Struble. I'll tell a short one that I will always remember Carol for. The new communications team was had been persuaded that the newsletter needed a name other than newsletter, or even UUCS newsletter. And I think it was Vicki Cunningham who had suggested the chalice and the flame. And you will find that on the front page of the newsletter still. And we got an email from Carol, and she said, yeah, that sounded good. She'd like to suggest that maybe instead of having AND, we would have an ampersand. And she commented, it not only saves space, it looks nice on the paper. I did discover that I can't draw it with my finger, but it looks nice on paper.
There are a couple people have written in. One is Vicki Cunningham, who commented on the beautiful music, how much she appreciated that, and that's a lovely reminder of Carol. Sarah Manka, that's a nice name, comments that Carol was a wonderful sister-in-law. I love hearing her ideas about books and nature. She dearly loved birds. I will truly miss her. And then Sarah also wrote for Andy, I had a great time every time I saw Carol. I loved talking with her about the census because of my statistical background, and I found her international travel so interesting. And Ben Paul apparently has taken a moment from the jewelry store to write, what a beautiful service. So happy to be a part of this, a bit remotely. Wonderful memories of Carol, and Carol will be dearly missed. Thank you. Certainly.
Hello, I'm Diane. I'm Carol and Paul's housekeeper. Can you hear me okay? They are very precious special people to me, and Carol was very precious and special, and I will dearly miss her. And I love cats as well. I'm an animal person, totally. We bonded together so easily when they had moved into Bonaventure, and I look so forward to every Thursday to serve them and clean. And we have cat time in the hallway. We have visitations and furry friend visits. So it's been just so precious to me. And there's been many times we've had really good conversation and sharing. And I so much appreciate them and love them dearly. They're family to me. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sherry. I also am from the Humane Society and got to know Carol and Paul when I started working there just about 4 years ago, and consider them friends and family. And a couple of my fondest memories are when I was able to write a feature story in our newsletter about Carol and Paul, and I knew of Carol's wonderful writing skills and Paul's wonderful support, and so I was a bit nervous to send my article to them and also to come to their wonderful place at Bonaventure to have their photo taken with their wonderful cats. And Paul and I joke that one of the cats, I consider myself cats to like me, went running away as fast as he could, and Paul said that he thought maybe I was there to return him to the shelter where he came from, and he was going to give up his winning the lottery, so to speak, with Paul and Carol. But I finished my article and nervously sent it off to Carol and Paul, and I don't know the right word, but I was proud, delighted, honored that Carol and Paul sent it back and said it looks great, but could you add a comma here, and this word needs to be hyphenated. So again, I consider both of them family and their cats, and as everyone has mentioned, all of the wonderful things that they have done for both the pets and people in our community will not soon be forgotten.
Well, Paul, as you know, we've known each other for quite some time now. My name is Denise, and I'm a veterinarian, and so I can attest to Carol and Paul's the fact that the cats that they have definitely win the lottery. I've known Paul and Carol since, I think it was 2007. Michael, I believe, was actually the first kitty that I knew of theirs and got the pleasure of taking care of. Carol was amazing. We stayed in touch throughout the years. I'm not in private practice now. I actually work for the government, so we also have that in common as well. But we remain close friends. And so we usually would try to get together before COVID and have lunch every few months. And I always really enjoyed listening to Carol. She was always very quiet, but everything she said was always, I would say, profound, and the discussion about how much wisdom she has is very true. So she'll definitely be missed.
I'm sure there are more stories to tell, and I'm happy to announce that we'll have a reception after this today, and we can sit around and continue to share our stories of Carol. But one picture is worth 1,000 words, so let's watch a bunch of pictures and get a fuller image of this wonderful woman we're saying goodbye to today. Thanks for that beautiful slideshow. I know a lot of volunteers helped put that together. I'm going to ring a bell just to invite us into a time of contemplation, prayerful meditation. And so as I ring this bell, I invite you now to center yourself in this moment, maybe following your breath to stay grounded. Feel your deep gratitude for the gift of Carol's life, for all the love she gave to others, her caring and compassionate gestures, her wit and wisdom, her creativity and joy. Feel your gratitude for the gift, the miracle of life. At such a moment as this, when our hearts are full of love and sorrow, may we remember that we did not begin when we were born. Our origin goes back far beyond this, to the beginning of all things. Our biography is the story of the sun and earth, of our parents, of our grandparents, and beyond this, to all humankind. And so we do not end when we come to die. We are a part of all that will ever be. Something eternal is revealed in everything. Our individual lives are pieces in the wondrous mosaic of life. We cannot comprehend the fullness of this reality in which we live and move and have our being. But we know that we are connected to one another in the infinite spirit of love. We belong to each other and to the infinite source of all being from which we come and to which we all return. It is a miracle, a wonder beyond mere words, beyond our highest understanding. And for this great gift of life and being, of birth and death, of life and joy and love, we are deeply grateful. And for the good and unique life of our dear friend Carol Jean Manka, loving wife, good friend to so many, inspiration to many others, we give special thanks this day. Amen. So I was thinking all during the service of how my heart aches that I didn't get to visit Carol during the pandemic. We tried to set up some appointments, and they kept falling through, and I wasn't able to. I did get to visit maybe just before the pandemic, but during the pandemic it was just not possible, and we would communicate. But my heart aches that I wasn't able to do that. And it just makes me aware of how precious each moment of our lives is, and that we should take all the opportunities that we can to show our appreciation for one another, to connect with one another, especially as we're coming out of this pandemic. I'm inspired to hear of the good work that Carol did through the Humane Society and this congregation, and I know now that it's time for us to return life and continue the good efforts that she put forth in this world. It's time for us to return to our lives now, and may it be so. At the end of all our worship services here, we say the same closing words because they are so succinct and powerful. We say the same closing words Sunday after Sunday, and so too will we close this service with these words. I'll say a phrase, and if you would like to repeat it after me, that's beautiful. May faith in the Spirit of life, hope for the community of earth, and love for the sacred in one another be with us now and in all the days to come. Amen. Thank you for coming, and please join us in the fellowship hall for our reception.